Hey guys, tonight we're going to explore a dark secret of history that textbooks never mention. Although you've heard about the greatness of Rome, there are 8 horrifying truths about the marriages of queens. Things that will make you rethink this empire. This isn't a fairy tale. It's a real-life nightmare for women who were turned into property, breeding machines, and targets of violence. We're going to delve into each of the reasons Roman queens feared their wedding nights, from being treated as political property to enduring brutal and humiliating rituals. And I guarantee you, the 7th reason will send a shiver down your spine and completely change how you see this civilization. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to comment where you're from and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Imagine a young Roman bride, barely in her adolescence, being gently but inexorably torn from her mother's embrace as a hushed crowd carries on as though this were a grand celebration. Her simple white tunic hangs loosely around her slight frame, slipping off one narrow shoulder, and her face glistens with tears that refuse to be stifled. She is no longer the child she was a moment ago. She is being ushered into a new existence from which there is no return. This is not a scene of romance or tender joy. It is the stark, unvarnished reality of a royal wedding in ancient Rome. You may imagine the grandeur of Rome, its gleaming marble statues, its palaces inlaid with gold, and the formidable power of its emperors. But beneath that gilded veneer lies a darkness that no schoolbook ever fully reveals. In this world, marriage was never an alliance of hearts, but rather a contract of power. The bride's sole purpose was to submit. Her silence was absolute law, and her future was determined long before she ever set foot in the palace. Consent was neither sought nor needed. Her body and her honor were pledged without question, because in the eyes of Roman society, she was property first and a person second. Even those women draped in gold, crowned with laurel wreaths, Roman queens, whose names are whispered in history, trembled at the thought of their wedding nights. They braced themselves for rituals designed to strip away every fragment of their identity, for laws that relegated them to mere chattels. The pageantry, the flowing silks, the songs and the torches, all of it was part of a carefully choreographed prison, constructed to remind the bride that her life no longer belonged to her. She wore splendor as if it were armor, but in truth it was chains forged by custom and codified by law. As night fell on the celebration, the bride's procession moved through torchlit corridors, her footsteps echoing on polished stone floors. She was surrounded by attendants whose faces remained inscrutable, their expressions trained to mask any hint of pity or sympathy. No one dared to comfort her too openly. Any display of compassion might be interpreted as defiance of the social order, and so she walked alone, save for the grasp of the guards on either side, through the immense doors of the emperor's palace, the threshold marking the end of childhood and the beginning of endless duty. You will come to see that the Roman Empire was not a beacon of progress, shining brightly for all to witness. Instead, it was a civilization built upon the systematic subjugation of women, where fear was woven into the very fabric of family life. The beauty you admire, the statues with their serene faces, the frescoes depicting idyllic scenes, is but a mask. Behind it is a story of forced obedience and silent suffering. No marriage vows were ever spoken with love. They were uttered with the authority of an empire. This is more than mere history. It is the tale of a waking nightmare, one in which the lines between law and cruelty blur. The bride who had dreams of laughter and song found herself swallowed by rituals of possession. Her tears, once the sign of sorrow, became part of the ceremonial spectacle. A legal requirement, in fact, for her grief to be deemed genuine. If she failed to weep, her marriage could be declared invalid, for a willing bride was unthinkable in a society built on the illusion of abduction. And so, she cried. She cried for the childhood she would never reclaim, for the freedom she would never again taste, and for the nights she would spend in solitude beneath heavy sheets scented with perfumed oils, oils meant to soothe, but which could not erase the knowledge that her body was no longer her own. Even in the arms of a husband she had never chosen, the echoes of her mother's embrace lingered in her mind like a fading lullaby. By the end of this narrative, you will understand that Rome's greatness was born from the silencing of countless voices, from the quelling of countless souls. Beauty, power, and glory were the currency of an empire that traded in the subjugation of its most vulnerable. In the hush of night, After the torches had dimmed and the guests had departed, the echo of that young bride's sobs remained, and it is that echo, as much as any marble monument, that tells the true story of ancient Rome. Here are the 8 horrifying reasons Roman queens feared their wedding nights. Reason the first: bride as political property. Allow your heavy eyelids to flutter open and envision a Roman bride, barely having entered her teenage years, not as a joyous young woman eagerly anticipating her future, but as a prized commodity brought forth for auction, regarded as political currency more valuable than any ox, donkey, or fertile parcel of land. In the imperial marriage system of ancient Rome, these women did not wed for love, they were sold. Truly sold, bound and endorsed by solemn contracts, whispered about among the patrician elite, and exchanged amidst the hollow applause of a crowd feigning celebration. Consent was not merely disregarded, it was deemed inappropriate. Parents might affix their signature to betroth a newborn daughter to a powerful figure before the infant could even cradle her own head. Such a contract held the weight of law for the remainder of her life, spanning countless seasons, allowing no room for question and no allowance for reluctance. A toddler might learn to take tentative steps and, at the same time, absorb the grim truth that her body belonged not to herself, but to the unseen party. Named in the document, an austere piece of parchment, printed in deep red ink, compelling her lifelong obedience to a stranger. Imagine her small feet trudging sleepily toward the vast palace gates, her heart hollow, her trembling hand clutching the oversized folds of her white tunic, sinking under the weight of a future, decided long before she could even speak her own name. Yet the most horrifying aspect was the societal embrace of this arrangement under the guise of a prestigious alliance, impudently termed a political union, instead of its true nature, human trafficking. Noble Roman families, resplendent in their finery, would sit by the auction stand, raising their hands to bid the highest sum for the female asset. The bride's worth was measured by coins, by political favor, by the might of her purchaser. Her emotions, her preferences, even her fundamental rights to bodily autonomy and personal dignity were never factored into the equation. No one cared if she trembled in fear. The crucial moment came when the auctioneer's hammer fell, and she belonged to a man she had never met, with no option to withdraw. To illustrate with a chilling example from the annals of history, Emperor Augustus, the first sovereign of Rome, forced his own daughter Livia to divorce the man she still loved, even while she was with child. She had no alternative but to obey the imperial command. One day she was wife to one man. The next, she was the possession of the most powerful individual in the empire, the very man who could determine the fate of dynasties. The unborn child in her womb became a bargaining chip, its tiny life a mere instrument to bolster Augustus's power. He compelled her to bear her former husband's offspring while she stood before a new altar. This cruelty was masked by ornate ceremonies and effusive praise, rendering her anguish a lonely sigh drowned out by the clamour of applause. Modern scholars assert that this practice was so thoroughly normalized that Roman women were conditioned from birth to accept that their bodies were not their own. They matured believing themselves to be breeding instruments, political merchandise, the final link in a chain of alliances. They never had the chance to learn love, to assert independence, or to protect their privacy. All their lessons in family and marriage were crafted to reinforce the authority of father and future husband. These young brides did not step into life with hope, but with dread, stepping lightly yet weighed down by terror. They carried within them the haunting question: was this marriage simply a facade for a political plot? Who would dictate their destiny, the future spouse or the emperor who paid handsomely for a prized commodity? And even when tears streamed down their cheeks, their sobs were merely an adjunct to the grand theatre of power. Thus, whenever the night breeze drifted through the silent city gates, these Roman brides, whether garbed in sumptuous robes or the plain woolen tunic, would wonder softly in their hearts, do I still remain myself, or have I become nothing more than a purchased object? It was this deep uncertainty, this fear of losing one's identity, that comprised the first reason Roman queens dreaded their wedding nights. For when the sun set, they found no escape from the harsh contract signed by their buyer, and their sleepy lament turned more haunting than any nightmare. Asterisk. Reason the second. Asterisk. Wedding ritual as psychological torture. Imagine drifting in and out of slumber, as you witness the Roman wedding ceremony not as a celebration of love, but as an elaborate form of psychological torture, meticulously choreographed to shatter a woman's will long before her wedding night. Every aspect of the ritual was designed to remind the bride that she was about to relinquish the last fragments of her human dignity. Begin with the bride's attire, a masterpiece of symbolic cruelty. She wore a plain white tunic fastened by what was known as the Knot of Hercules, an impossibly intricate knot that only her new husband was permitted to untie on their wedding night. Picture yourself dressed in garments that literally advertise your impending sexual assault to every guest gathered in the hall, the audience watching as if they were witnessing a sanctioned act rather than a violation of your personhood. Then consider the flamium, the bright red-orange veil that covered her head and face. This shade was chosen for its explicit associations with blood sacrifice and flames of destruction. Roman brides were literally draped, like sacrificial victims being led to slaughter. Their hair was styled to mirror that of the Vestal Virgins, the priestesses who guarded Rome's sacred fire, and who were buried alive if they ever lost their virginity. The bride thus became a walking tableau of violence and ritual humiliation, echoing the fate of those priestesses who had perished for a single perceived transgression. But the horror did not end with attire. Roman law actually mandated that the bride must cry and scream throughout the ceremony, as though she were being abducted at that very moment. This was not an expression of genuine emotion, but a legal requirement. If a bride appeared too happy or willing, the marriage could be declared invalid, because it had to appear as if she were being forced. Envision the dissonance of being compelled to wail and lament, to make a spectacle of your own dread, knowing that any sign of calm acceptance would unravel the entire contract. You will not find this in your standard history textbooks, but Roman law required witnesses to attest that the bride had been properly seized from her family. On some occasions, attendants would literally wrench her from her mother's arms while she cried out for help, and the assembled onlookers would cheer, convinced that such violence was an auspicious omen. The very act of abduction was celebrated, cheered, and praised as a mark of divine favor, rather than condemned as an act of cruelty against one's own daughter. Perhaps the most chilling element was the crossing of the threshold. Far from a romantic gesture, being carried over the threshold symbolized that the bride had no authority to enter her new home on her own terms. She was cargo, delivered to its new owner. Imagine the weight of that moment. Your pale body pressed against another's chest, as you take your first steps as someone else's property, the threshold marking not a fresh start of marital bliss, but an admission of utter powerlessness. Throughout this ritual, the bride was surrounded by witnesses charged with ensuring every detail unfolded according to law. No compassion was allowed. No one was permitted to offer solace or a comforting word. To do so would be to undermine the ceremony's purpose, to underscore that the bride was now a captive of the state, of her husband, and of centuries of custom that denied her any right to autonomy or consent. In the dim glow of torches, the sounds of wailing brides merged with the murmur of chants and the crackle of incense. Every beat of her heart echoed the pounding of ritual drums. Every tear she shed became a testament to her forced transition from person to property. The procession moved as if through a dream, each step a descent deeper into a carefully constructed nightmare. By the ceremony's conclusion, the bride stood stripped not of her clothes alone, but of her dignity, her voice reduced to the theatrical wails demanded by law. She was sealed into her new identity, no longer a daughter, sister, or independent individual, but a possession bound to her husband. The wedding ritual, far from marking the joyful union of two souls, served as the psychological crucible that prepared her for a lifetime of silence and submission. And so, as you succumb to drowsiness, envision this chilling rite played out in a great hall of marble and shadow. Understand that for Roman queens, the seemingly celebratory wedding ceremony was instead a meticulously designed instrument of psychological torment, ensuring that before their wedding nights even began, a part of them had already been irrevocably broken. Reason the third. Marriage as legal slavery. Allow your eyelids to grow heavy as we explore a truth so astonishing it may feel like a fading dream. Roman marriage was not a partnership of equals. It was a lawful transfer of ownership that made even the institution of slavery seem almost merciful. Under a statute known as manis, a woman literally passed from her father's property into the hands of her husband, endowed with even fewer legal safeguards than livestock. The moment those fateful wedding vows were spoken, a Roman queen relinquished every lawful right she had ever held. Her husband could beat her, rape her, sell her possessions, or even end her life, and it would all remain strictly legal, provided he could claim that such actions were merely family discipline. She could not own property, could not sign contracts, and could not set foot outside her home without his explicit permission. Yet the most harrowing detail lies in the very language of the law. Roman statutes declared unequivocally that a wife's body belonged entirely to her husband. The legal code employed the exact same terminology to describe a man's relationship with his wife as with the animals on his estate. She was a breeding tool that happened to walk upright, her only function to perpetuate the family line. Roman husbands wielded what they called patria potestas, absolute power over their wives, including the right to execute them for adultery, disobedience, or even the most trivial of infractions, such as drinking wine without permission. Cato the Elder, one of Rome's most revered statesmen, once proudly declared that he would personally slay his wife should he find her indulging in wine without his leave. Imagine drifting into a deeper state of drowsiness as you picture this grim reality. The bride, freshly spirited away from her mother's arms, tasting the sharp tang of fear as her future evaporates. The glare of torchlight dances on the cold marble as the husband raises his hand in authority, reminded by law that his wife is his possession. She will spend her days in silence, and her nights in submission, always under threat of cruel retribution if she dares to defy him. There is no sanctuary within these walls, no refuge from the knowledge that she is legally barred from autonomy. Modern legal scholars compare Roman marriage contracts to the deeds of slave ownership, with the only distinction that slaves occasionally had a chance to purchase their freedom. A Roman wife, however, was condemned to lifelong bondage unless her husband chose to grant her a divorce. And divorce was rarely a merciful release. In most cases, she would be dispatched back to her father in utter disgrace, or cast out into the streets with nothing but the clothes on her back. The social stigma attached to a divorced woman was so severe that many chose to remain in abusive marriages rather than face the shame of returning home in defeat. The cruelty of this system was so deeply ingrained that there were those who preferred the status of mistress or the life of a courtesan, precisely because those roles afforded more personal freedom than marriage. A mistress, though operating outside the bounds of legal respectability, could negotiate terms of affection, receive financial support, and maintain a measure of independence denied to a wife. A courtesan, for all her social marginalization, could cultivate patrons, control her own schedule, and even amass wealth, all unimaginable luxuries within the marriage bed of a Roman queen. Consider, too, the psychological torment of knowing that every tender gesture, every whispered word, was shadowed by the understanding that she was chattel. The wedding ring was not a symbol of mutual devotion but a seal of ownership. The marital bed was not a sanctuary of intimacy but a site of potential violence. And each time she glanced into a mirror, she had to reconcile her reflection with the reality that she had no right to her own image, to her own body. At night, when the torches flickered low and the guests' laughter echoed down the palace corridors, the bride would lie awake in a borrowed bed, her heart pounding in synchrony with the distant drums of the city. She might pray for a husband with even the faintest shred of mercy, but the law offered her no protection, no recourse, no hope. Her only means of survival was to endure, to accept the yoke of patria potestas without complaint, lest she invite yet harsher punishment. Such was the third horrifying reason Roman queens feared their wedding nights. Marriage was not the merging of two lives, but the handing over of one life to another's absolute authority. Drifting off to sleep, imagine the weight of that realization pressing down like 1,000 iron shackles. In the silent darkness, the bride's final vestige of autonomy slipped away, and she awoke each dawn in a world where love was outlawed and slavery was sanctified by law. Reason the fourth. Wedding night as conquest. Drift into this somnolent vision of ancient Rome's wedding night, and know that it was never about love or tenderness. Instead, it was crafted as an act of conquest. Roman writers compared the union to a military campaign, likening the husband to a triumphant general and the wife to a territory newly subdued. Picture a girl of barely 13 or 14 summers, her life scarcely begun, bound to a man twice her age or older. Their marriage was not the blossoming of affection, but the execution of power. For many of these young brides, that first night was a moment of sheer terror, not celebration. In somber verses, poets like Ovid wove metaphors of siege and strategy around these weddings. They praised the husband's dominance as the ultimate proof of virility and might, while the bride's silence and trembling became the trophies of his success. The more she quaked and bowed her head, the more he rose in status. Imagine her delicate form shivering in the dim torchlight, every heartbeat pounding in time with the phalanx drums of martial metaphor. Her fear was the currency of his honor, her tears were his laurels. Sleepily, consider the medical texts of the era, which speak in hushed tones of the agonies endured. Physicians recorded cases of brides suffering excruciating pain, both physical and psychological, yet culture decreed such suffering normal. Any word of protest would be interpreted as defiance of the sacred nuptial contract, a crime punishable by dishonor or worse. To speak up was to risk being branded an oath-breaker, thereby forfeiting any sympathy or legal protection. The bride was caught in a paradox. She was expected to endure, yet forbidden even to whisper her suffering. Some brides, it is said, sought refuge in botanical remedies or mild intoxicants before the dreaded night. They hoped that opiate poppies or soothing herbs might dull the intensity of their dread. Others spoke of despair so profound that they would rather embrace oblivion than face this grim rite of passage. These whispered confessions slipped through closed doors and furtive corridors, passing from one trembling chambermaid to another. Yet none could alter the script. The wedding night remained a public spectacle of celebration, music, torches, and laughter, masking the bride's private recollection of mortal combat. Imagine, as you sink deeper into drowsiness, the bride's trembling fingers clutching the edge of a silken sheet. She braces herself as if for combat, her pulse racing faster than the war drums echoing in the poems of the time. Every rustle of fabric becomes the rustle of armor, every hushed breath, the soldier's lull before battle. In that vast bedchamber, she knows she has no chance of victory. Her role is to yield completely, becoming prey to the triumphant conqueror at her side. Consider, too, the absence of compassion in the flickering torchlight. The wedding guests, arrayed in their ceremonial robes, offered no comfort, only cheering as the groom claimed his prize. The bride's sobs were not interruptions but expected parts of the ritual, signs of a conquest duly completed. The public acclaim that greeted the groom stood in stark contrast to the private terror of the bride, whose memories of that night would haunt her long after the torches had dimmed. And so, in this hush of history, you glimpse the hidden truth of Roman weddings. A night celebrated in public as a union, but remembered in the quiet of one's soul as a battle she could never win. As slumber beckons, let the weight of that realization press upon you gently, a final reminder that for Roman queens, wedding night was conquest, and in conquest there is no mercy. Asterisk, asterisk. Reason the fifth. Asterisk, asterisk. Terrifying breeding machine pressure. Let your heavy eyelids drift as you envision the life of a Roman queen, weighed down by pressures so immense they could crush any modern woman. Her entire worth was measured by a single metric: her ability to produce a male heir. To fail was to invite disgrace, banishment, or even death. In this system, women were literally treated as reproductive machines, their sole purpose to generate the emperors of tomorrow. Each month that passed without pregnancy was deemed a personal failure, a deficit recorded in the annals of imperial expectations. Picture the humiliation of medical examinations. Twice, thrice, or more in a single season, physicians would peer into the depths of her secret chamber, probing her body for signs of fertility. These ministrations were anything but discreet. The queen reclined on a cold marble slab, surrounded by trembling attendants, while doctors declared her defective if she did not conceive at once. The whispers of defect echoed through the palace corridors like a death knell for her reputation. Some queens, desperate to delay this horror, feigned pregnancy, swelling their abdomens with herbs and concoctions to buy time. But such ruses were temporary reprieves. The scrutiny would always return, sharper and more merciless than before. Imagine the gulf between hope and terror as you lie half asleep, thinking of a newborn princess. In Rome, giving birth to a daughter was almost as catastrophic as remaining childless. Roman law did not recognize female inheritance. A queen who bore only daughters was deemed an utter failure, squandering the resources and time of the emperor. She was a defective product, returned to the shelf, her prestige evaporating like dew at dawn. The palace buzzed with gossip. Gossip that could lead to annulment, exile, or worse. A daughter's cry in the nursery was greeted not with joy but with whispers of wasted effort and wasted wealth. Consider the tragic fate of Julia, Augustus's own daughter. By the time she reached 25, she had been married and divorced 3 times. Each dissolution was not the fault of fickle politics or romantic misfortune, but the absence of a male heir in her womb. In the eyes of the state, her political value shifted with every pregnancy that failed to produce a boy. She was passed from one husband to the next like a flawed statue returned to different workshops, her dignity chipped away by cold political calculus. Each marriage marked her as a tool to be tested, tossed aside if she did not measure up. Even more harrowing is the account of Poppaea Sabina, the wife of Emperor Nero. She died in childbirth after Nero, enraged at her failure to bear a son swiftly enough, kicked her in the abdomen during an argument. The blow ruptured her womb, ending both her life and that of her unborn child. He had shattered the vessel that was meant to carry his legacy, struck down by the very man whose lineage he was destined to continue. This was not an isolated event, but a grim testament to the lengths Roman rulers would go to secure their succession. Modern medical experts now recognize what these women endured as severe reproductive trauma. Their bodies were subjected to continuous pregnancies, miscarriages, and the relentless stress of knowing that their lives and the fate of their families depended on each conception. The physical toll was catastrophic. Weakened by near-constant childbearing, many queens suffered chronic pain, infections, and lifelong ailments. The emotional toll was equally devastating. The knowledge that a single stillbirth or male infant lost to illness would render her worthless once more, condemned to oblivion or disgrace. And even the most successful queens, those who did produce sons, lived in perpetual fear. A male heir's death, whether by disease or accident, could strike at any hour. One morning she might awaken to news of a prince's fall from a chariot or succumbing to fever, and in that instant she would become worthless again. Her life's work, her sacrifice, all undone by a twist of fate. The court's favour would evaporate overnight, her power slipping through her fingers like sand. In that fragility lay the cruelest irony. She could save the dynasty with a son's birth, but she could lose her own life with that same child's demise. In the hush of night, listen for the soft rustle of silk as a queen turns in her bed, haunted by what tomorrow's dawn may bring. She drifts between hope and dread, knowing that each breath, each heartbeat, propels her toward another cycle of medical inspection and whispered judgment. The palace seems to hold its breath with her, for the stability of an empire rests on her womb. In that weighty silence, she is no longer a person but an instrument of state, calibrated and examined, her humanity subsumed by relentless reproductive expectation. Thus stands the 5th horrifying reason Roman queens dreaded their wedding nights. Beneath the veneer of ceremony lay a nightmare of endless reproductive obligation. As lethargy settles over you, imagine the crushing pressure pressing on that young woman's chest, heavier than any crown, reminding her that her first night of marriage was but the beginning of a ceaseless, unforgiving duty to produce the next emperor or face oblivion. Reason the 6th. Obligatory silence of suffering. Allow your eyes to grow heavy as we uncover a truth even darker than abuse itself. Roman queens were expected to endure heinous cruelty in absolute silence. Speaking of their pain or trauma was considered more shameful than the abuse. This was not merely a social expectation. It was a legal mandate that could sentence them to death for tarnishing their husband's honor. In Roman culture existed a doctrine known as pudicidia, which, at its core, was the sacred duty of a woman never to complain about anything her husband did to her, no matter how brutal or contemptible. A queen who dared to speak of marital rape, beatings, or psychological torture was deemed worse than a common prostitute because she was betraying her divine obligation of silence. But the worst part lies in the law itself. Roman statutes explicitly forbade women from testifying about their own abuse in court. Imagine drifting into slumber, knowing that even if you were beaten unconscious by your spouse, your own words would hold no power in a trial. Only male witnesses could speak of domestic violence, and, perhaps unsurprisingly, male family members rarely testified against other men. The Queen's voice was legally silenced. If she attempted to seek justice, her testimony would be dismissed as hearsay, or, worse, an affront to the sanctity of marriage. Picture the queen returning to her father's palace for refuge. Often, she would be met with cold admonishment rather than comfort. Fathers would insist she bear her suffering with dignity, warning that airing her grievances would disgrace the family's political standing. Some princes would refuse to see their daughter at all, deeming it too humiliating to acknowledge they had married her to a monster. The queen, caught between brutal husband and indifferent father, found herself alone in her pain. Ancient medical texts provide haunting glimpses of the aftermath. Physicians recorded cases of royal women arriving with unmistakable signs of severe abuse. Broken bones, internal injuries, profound psychological trauma. Yet, doctors were forbidden to record these wounds as anything other than accidents or innate female weakness. Imagine a physician forced to label a fractured rib as a fall from a chair to avoid implicating her husband. The true nature of her wounds had to remain obscured, buried beneath euphemism and silent compliance. You will not learn this in school, but many Roman queens devised intricate systems of silent communication to warn other women of dangerous men. When direct speech was impossible, they resorted to coded messages in clothing choices, jewelry, and subtle body language. A particular brooch might signify betrayal. A scarf worn in a certain knot might warn of impending violence. These cryptic signals formed a clandestine network of solidarity and survival among women, a whispered rebellion against the mandated hush. Despite these covert efforts, the silence was so profound that we possess almost no first-person accounts of what Roman queens truly endured. Any written confession could have led to execution, leaving their stories unrecorded and their voices lost to history. What remains are echoes in the margins, brief mentions in medical notes, passing references in legal codes barely enough to reconstruct the magnitude of their suffering. Imagine, as sleep beckons, the scene of a queen sitting alone in a moonlit chamber, her body trembling from fresh wounds, her mind racing with memories she cannot speak. She touches the brooch at her throat, a silent code to her chambermaid that danger lurks in the corridors. Yet she cannot break the vow of pudicidia. To cry out would risk her life and her title. So she endures, each gasp of pain swallowed, each tear wiped away in solitude. In that quiet darkness, her agony is heightened by the knowledge that no comfort will come, no justice will be served. The walls of the palace become her prison, and the law that was meant to protect her instead ensures her oppression. She drifts between consciousness and slumber, haunted by visions of freedom she cannot voice, trapped in a nightmare from which there is no waking. Thus stands the sixth horrifying reason Roman queens feared their wedding nights. Their suffering was bound by law and custom to absolute silence. As the last flicker of torchlight fades, imagine that silence pressing in around you, a suffocating reminder that in ancient Rome, the only crime a queen could commit was to survive, and that survival demanded her voice remain forever mute. Asterisk, asterisk, reason the seventh, asterisk, asterisk, violence, sanctioned by law. Allow your thoughts to drift as you imagine the world of ancient Rome, where husbands were not merely permitted to abuse their wives, they were legally obligated to discipline them with violence should they stray from accepted behavior. In this realm, wife-beating was not categorized as domestic abuse. Instead, it was upheld as responsible household management, judged by other men if left undone. Under Roman law, a husband wielded the right to administer what was euphemistically termed moderate correction to his wife for offences as minor as speaking without permission, leaving the house alone, or even merely gazing at another man. Picture a decree flatly stating that a gentle slap or a firm beating with a rod or whip, or confinement in a dark room without food for several days, constituted appropriate enforcement of marital harmony. The very capacity for such punishment underscored a husband's authority, ensuring that no wife could ever step out of line without fear of sanctioned retribution. Yet, as you sink deeper into this somnolent reflection, know that the cruelty extended far beyond mere bodily harm. Roman husbands also possessed the legal right to take their wives' lives on the grounds of adultery, an offence so broadly defined that it could encompass anything the husband disliked. A conversation with a male friend, the acceptance of a gift, or too bright a smile at a public gathering could be reinterpreted as betrayal and punishable by execution. Consider the tragic case of Messalina, wife of Emperor Claudius. She was accused of adultery by political enemies, charges almost certainly fabricated and put to death without trial, denied any chance to defend herself or explain. One day she wore the diadem of a queen. The next, she lay lifeless, a victim of rumors the emperor chose to believe. In her final moments, the weight of law sanctioned her death, transforming her from sovereign to corpse in a heartbeat. Roman legal texts record horrors beyond that. Wives have been beaten to death for grievous offences, such as expressing political opinions or requesting new garments. These were not crimes under any modern concept of justice. They were ordinary domestic disagreements that culminated in murder, deemed acceptable under the letter of the law. Imagine drifting towards sleep while recalling a husband striking his wife for daring to speak her mind, and the law nodding in approval. Violence in ancient Rome was not confined to the physical. Psychological torment was a constant weapon in a husband's arsenal. He might threaten to sell their children into slavery, sever her ties with her natal family, or even arrange for the execution of her dearest relatives if she failed to obey unconditionally. Such threats severed her emotional anchors, leaving her isolated and broken, more terrified of compliance than of resistance. Modern historians believe that domestic violence in Rome was so normalized that many abusive behaviors went unrecorded as they were deemed unremarkable. What remains in the legal and medical scraps we possess are only the most extreme instances, the grotesque apex of a vast, terrorizing system. Countless other assaults, daily humiliations, secret beatings, whispered threats went undocumented, hidden beneath the veneer of normalcy. Picture yourself drifting between wakefulness and slumber as you contemplate the chilling prescription of Roman law, that a man's failure to punish his wife could lead to scorn from his peers, yet any punishment he chose to inflict remained shielded by statute. No protective counsel existed for the wife. Her cries for mercy fell on ears trained by custom and law to ignore. In such a world, each tick of the clock was a march toward either violent punishment or the constant threat of it. As you surrender to the weight of drowsiness, envision the wife who trembles at her husband's passing glance, for it may herald a cane or a whip. The chamber that should be a sanctuary becomes a courtroom of terror, where every infraction, real or imagined, can warrant a correction sanctioned by the state. Her nights are restless. Even in crowded halls, she feels utterly alone, guarded only by laws that strip her of protection and endorse her subjugation. In the quiet hush that follows, let the knowledge settle. The seventh horrifying reason Roman queens feared their wedding nights was that violence was not only condoned but required by law. And in that requirement lay the grim foundation for a marriage built on terror rather than trust, on fear rather than affection. As your eyelids droop, imagine the hush that fell over countless palaces at dusk, the dread that shadowed every bride's first night, and the cold certainty that no corner of the empire's law could protect her from the very man she had pledged to love. Asterisk. Asterisk. Reason the eighth. Asterisk. Asterisk. Reputation as a weapon of destruction. Allow the gentle pull of fatigue to guide you into the unsettling world of ancient Rome, where a queen's reputation was more fragile than crystal and more precious than gold, yet could shatter in an instant at the whim of rumor, deceit, or a scheming political rival. In Roman society, a woman's honor was considered the foundation of familial power. A single whisper of impropriety, true or false, could unravel her life completely, casting her into exile, execution, or social death. Imagine drifting towards sleep, knowing that even your most innocent smile might become fodder for scandalous gossip. Roman culture was so fixated on female virtue that unsubstantiated accusations alone could ruin a queen. A mere suggestion of sexual misconduct, however baseless, sufficed to trigger her downfall. Society demanded the utmost caution in every gesture, every word. Queens became prisoners within their own palaces, afraid to converse with any guest or perform the simplest tasks that might be misinterpreted. Even a fleeting glance at a courtier could be manipulated into evidence of seduction. Their every move was scrutinized, their silence expected, their dignity at perpetual risk. But the truly horrifying element lay in the deliberate weaponization of reputation by Roman men. When a political faction sought to eliminate an inconvenient queen, they spread salacious rumors about her private life, and let the prevailing misogyny of Roman society do the rest. A carefully crafted whisper campaign could label her as adulterous, power-hungry, or immoral, all without the need for proof. The courts and the public alike accepted these fabrications. For who dared defend a woman accused of such crimes? Consider the tragic fate of Julia, daughter of the first emperor, Augustus. Once among the most powerful women in Rome, she fell victim to rumors of infidelity. Rumors that modern historians believe were entirely concocted by her father's political adversaries. Within moments, her status dissolved. She was exiled to a remote island for the remainder of her days. One morning, she adorned the purple cloak of imperial lineage. The next, she was a forgotten outcast, her name struck from official records. Her life ended in solitude, a poignant testament to how swiftly reputation could turn from shield to noose. Even queens who adhered strictly to every rule lived in unending dread of slander. Livia, wife of Augustus for more than 50 years, endured a constant undercurrent of spiteful whispers, accusing her of manipulation, poisoning rivals, or secretly controlling the emperor. These rumors never ceased, haunting her in every corridor and banquet hall. She learned to trust no one fully, relying on her own vigilance and a network of discreet informants to alert her to fresh attacks on her honor. You will not learn this in any conventional lesson on classical history, but Roman queens developed elaborate strategies to safeguard their reputations. They maintained personal networks of spies, trusted ladies-in-waiting, estate overseers, and even foreign envoys tasked with monitoring public opinion. Bribes were dispensed to influencers and scribes to suppress harmful gossip before it spread. A deftly placed gift here, a discreet hush payment there, all served to stem the tide of damaging hearsay. Yet no amount of gold or persuasion could wholly erase a particularly persistent slander once it took hold. The perils of reputation extended beyond immediate court circles into every corner of the empire. A rumor seeded in Rome could travel along trade routes, take root in provincial cities, and return amplified, threatening a queen's standing among distant subjects. Even a fleeting mention in a merchant's tavern could spark fresh talk in aristocratic salons. With communication so intertwined with politics, a queen's honor was a perpetual battlefield. As your consciousness drifts, imagine the toll this took on a queen's mind. She awoke each day uncertain whether she would remain mistress of her own fate or become a hunted casualty of rumor. Every greeting from a nobleman or foreign dignitary carried the risk of judgment. Did he offer true respect, or was his courtesy a thin veil for suspicion? In such a climate, trust became a precious commodity few could afford. In the quiet of a moonlit chamber, a queen might sit alone, staring into a pool of water or a polished metal mirror, questioning her own reflection. Was she still the woman she had been, or merely the sum of others' accusations? The silence pressed in on her, more suffocating than any walls. She clutched the talismans of loyalty rings, tokens, letters sent by those who remained faithful, yet even these offered only fleeting solace. Thus it was that reputation became the eighth horrifying reason Roman queens dreaded their wedding nights. For when the celebrations ended, they stepped into a world where their very names could be weaponized against them, where innocence offered no immunity, and where the softest murmur might herald their ruin. As you surrender to sleep, let this realization settle like a weight upon your heart. In ancient Rome, the most potent weapon was not sword or spear, but the cruel power to destroy a woman's honor and, through it, her life. And so we have peeled back the 8 layers of horror that awaited Roman queens on their wedding nights, each revealing a darker facet of power, ritual, and suffering. Yet the nightmare did not fade with the final vow or the last torchlit chant. In truth, the wedding night was merely the prologue to a lifetime of bondage, where every dawn brought fresh restrictions, relentless scrutiny, and the loss of every ounce of autonomy. What follows is the grim reality of a queen's existence as a legal slave, condemned to endure unending cycles of control, confinement, and coercion under the guise of matrimony. Horrifying lifelong enslavement. Drift with me into a realm where the wedding night is merely the opening scene of a saga of unending torment. Once a Roman woman exchanged her vow of love, she surrendered every shred of autonomy. She could not choose her bedchamber's walls, nor speak freely beyond palace gates, nor lay claim to any piece of land or coin. Instead, her life became a ceaseless ordeal of servitude, with the relentless demand to bear heirs as the only purpose guiding her days. Each month that passed without the promise of a child was a stain on her reputation, branding her incompetent in the eyes of the court. The whisper of another month lost without a womb's success might cost her title, send her into exile, or seal her fate at the executioner's block. Imagine the grinding anxiety that built with every lunar cycle. As the moon waned, so did her standing, eroded by the ticking of an unforgiving calendar. Her spirit bled a little more each dawn under the weight of legal silence and sanctioned violence. She endured physical beatings, whips, rods, and hands that struck with judicial approval, then bore the added burden of emotional punishment as her honor teetered on a razor's edge. A daughter born into the harsh light of day could be deemed worthless, leading the emperor to liquidate his spouse in favor of another bride deemed more fertile. Many noblewomen found a tragic alternative path. They became mistresses or governmental sex slaves, roles that, for all their degradation, at least offered scraps of personal agency and fleeting tenderness. Some were granted mercy through forced residence in the so-called red chambers. These rooms, saturated with opiate incense and garlands of potent herbs, doubled as prison cells and workshops of control. The queen lay on cold slabs as a doctor's gloved hands examined her womb, searching not for comfort but for a guarantee of fertility. These examinations, literally soaked in blood and fear, became rituals of submission rather than care. Her physical health withered, her back hunched, her cheeks hollow while her mind unraveled in the endless cycle of hope and despair. Roman medical treatises reveal shocking statistics. A significant proportion of royal women succumbed to physical exhaustion, chronic disease, or the unrelenting psychological trauma of their condition. Some legends speak of women stepping into the bathhouse's waters one evening and never returning, their bodies discovered in the cistern at dawn, a silent protest against a life that offered no solace. The Roman annals hint at suicides hidden among natural deaths, black marks on the ledger of empire that only the most astute historians ever piece together. In the public glare, Rome lauded the virtue of its men, while cloaking the brutal subjugation of its women beneath layers of gilded ceremony. Female life expectancy in the ancient city was markedly lower than that of men, a grim testament to the toll of enforced childbearing and sanctioned violence. Yet the state's grandeur rose on the pillars of these women's shattered bodies and silenced spirits. The political machinery that upheld this system functioned with ruthless efficiency. Senators and consuls, draped in togas of white and purple, exchanged polite bows while sealing decrees that bound their daughters and sisters into this horrific institution. Each marriage contract drew new lines on the map of power, and each imperial decree hardened the chains around a queen's wrists. She became a trophy of dynastic alliance, a living monument to the will of men more than to her own humanity. Imagine, as you drift towards sleep, the daily rituals that marked her descent into perpetual servitude. The morning examination of her fertility, the midday parade of advisors reminding her of her duty, the evening proclamation of her pregnancy status or lack thereof to the court. Her days flowed together in a haze of enforced compliance, her nights haunted by the dread of tomorrow's inquest. No sanctuary existed within palatial walls. Only the relentless apparatus of state control pressed upon her, tightening with each heartbeat. In her final years, few found peace. Some retreated into the silent shadows of a private wing, avoiding any semblance of command or ceremony. Others clung desperately to the memory of autonomy they had never truly known, speaking only in dreams of a freedom that vanished the moment their wedding torches dimmed. Often, the end came as a quiet fade, unnoticed by the empire that had exploited her life as currency. Thus unfolds the terrible truth of lifelong enslavement. A Roman queen's journey was not one of regal splendor, but a ceaseless cycle of loss of choice, of dignity, of self. As the chapters of her life closed, she was left not with a legacy of deeds or monuments, but with the hollow echo of a vow that bound her to bondage. And in the hush of history, her story remains a whisper, urging us to remember that the grandest empires can rise only upon the most profound suffering. As you drift back to the majestic ruins of Rome in your mind, you may recall the gleaming marble columns, the opulent imperial palaces, and the enduring legend of an empire that once spanned continents. Yet beneath that polished surface lay the hidden anguish of countless women, from tender girls, barely on the cusp of womanhood, to reigning empresses adorned in gold and laurel. They were not fairy tale princesses living lives of splendor. They were victims of a merciless system in which cries of pain were silenced, suffering was enshrined in law, and flesh was traded like any other commodity. Let us revisit the 8 dreadful truths that have peeled back the facade. First, the bride was political property, sold at auction rather than wed for love. Second, the wedding ritual itself was a form of psychological torture, every knot and veil designed to humiliate. Third, marriage was legal enslavement, transferring a woman from her father's ownership to her husband's, with fewer rights than farm animals. Fourth, the wedding night was conceived as conquest, a martial display of domination that left young brides trembling like conquered territory. Fifth, the pressure to produce male heirs was so extreme that queens endured monthly verdicts of failure if pregnancy did not follow promptly, with miscarriages and female births carrying the same stigma as complete barrenness. Sixth, they were bound to absolute silence about any abuse, with legal doctrine forbidding them from testifying against their own tormentors. Seventh, violence was not only permitted but mandated by law. Husbands wielded rods, whips, and even the power of life and death to enforce family discipline. Eighth, reputation was weaponized, where a single rumor of impropriety, however fabricated, could exterminate a queen's standing, leading to exile or execution without trial. For these women, existence was a perpetual nightmare from which there was no waking. Each day brought the same litany of constraints: no choice in where to live, no freedom to speak with outsiders, no ownership of property, and the ever-present demand to bear children. The psychological bleeding was ceaseless, born of legal silence, bodily violence, emotional torment, and the constant threat to their honor. Some were cast aside after producing only daughters. Others sought refuge as imperial concubines or courtesans, where at least they could negotiate some measure of personal autonomy. A few were confined to the dreaded red chambers, where opiates, ritual blood symbolism, and invasive medical examinations merged in a grotesque theatre of submission. Roman medical treatises record their chronic exhaustion, their shattered health, and their spiraling psychological trauma. Many ended their own lives, leaving behind scarcely more than a footnote in the annals of empire. Yet these women formed the underpinnings of Rome's grandeur, their broken bodies and subdued spirits hidden beneath triumphal arches and statues of stone. The political machinery celebrated the virtue of men while smothering women's rights, consigning them to lifespans far shorter than their male counterparts, and burying them in the shadows of palace corridors. History offers no sanctuary for illusions. What we learn in school is but a fragment, a mythologized record that omits the darkest chapters of human cruelty. Let the image of that tear-stained Roman bride, torn from her mother's arms under the roar of a false jubilation, stand as a stark reminder that behind every act of statecraft lay silenced screams and clandestine injustices. If these harrowing truths have left you unsettled, do not turn away now. Continue this journey into the obscured corridors of time by subscribing to our channel. Together, we will unearth more hidden narratives that conventional history books have glossed over. For history is not merely a chronicle of the past, it is a mirror held up to present-day inequities that still echo in our world. Do you have the courage to face these uncomfortable truths? If so, press that subscribe button and join us as we continue to peel back the layers of history's darkest secrets. In the end, the lessons of ancient Rome may serve as both warning and guide, reminding us that civilizations rest not only on their triumphs, but also on the suffering they conceal. Post-marriage psychology. Sequelae of fear. Allow your eyelids to droop as we turn our gaze to the lingering aftermath of a Roman woman's marriage, a landscape marked by invisible wounds and haunting memories. After enduring days of ritual imprisonment, a wedding night steeped in bitterness, and relentless breeding demands, she carried within her a treasury of psychological trauma. Most empresses spent their lives wrestling with the obsession of lost freedom, the terror of recurring violence, and the conviction that they were fundamentally worthless. They existed in a state of unremitting pressure, chronic stress, that gave rise to anxiety disorders, deep depression, and what modern specialists would identify as post-traumatic stress disorder. Sleepily, picture the Roman medical manuscripts that detail their symptoms. Nights of sleepless tossing, hearts pounding as if drums of war echoed in their chests, unending fatigue that no bath or ointment could alleviate, and a tangible droop in their life force. Yet in a culture that considered female fragility a given, physicians typically prescribed soothing herbs or dosed them with wine interventions that eased pain for a fleeting moment, but brewed hidden dangers. Some empresses, desperate for relief, slipped beyond palace walls in search of forbidden solace, forging secret liaisons or fleeting friendships where someone would whisper kindness, or at least pretend to see them as human beings rather than political instruments. The psychological scars deepened when law and family ties forbade any honest expression of suffering. Any woman who dared expose her emotional wounds was branded a traitor to her duty, her reputation sullied, her rights stripped away. The once adored daughter could find herself shunned by kin, isolated in gilded apartments, her pleas for empathy dismissed as selfish indulgence. Without the emotional support of her household, she slowly lost faith in the very bonds meant to protect her, slipping into solitude so profound that some turned inward, entertaining thoughts of self-destruction as the only escape from a world that refused to acknowledge their pain. Yet, even amid such darkness, there were flickers of defiance. A handful of emboldened queens undertook quiet rebellions, pouring their anguish into hidden diaries, letters sealed and dispatched to friends in distant provinces, pleading that the true story of their torment reached beyond the palace gates. They feigned illness to secure absences from the court, hoping to find sanctuary in remote villas or among sympathetic kin. Though few of these secret missives survived the march of centuries, the courage of those who dared to record their truth lingers in fleeting fragments, a testament to the resilience of women who refused total erasure. In the hush of twilight, imagine one such queen reclining on her bedchamber's silken sheets, quill in hand, her script a labyrinth of sorrow and defiance. She writes of dreams where she runs free through fields unfenced by duty, of daylight moments when the walls of marble seem to pulse with the echo of her own suppressed cries. Each word is a small rebellion, a quiet refusal to vanish into the footnotes of history. Despite the stealth of their resistance, the vast majority of these women returned to the enforced silence of court life, their voices buried beneath protocol and fear. Their diaries, if hidden well, remained undiscovered, or, if found, were swiftly confiscated by palace scribes. The legal and social structures of Rome left them little choice: compliance or annihilation. Most learned to contain their anguish, their faces calm masks that betrayed nothing, even as their minds churned with memories no one else could see. Through repeated cycles of concealing and surviving, some began to piece together coping strategies. They formed secret alliances with trusted attendants, sharing whispered confidences in secluded corridors. They used ritual prayer not only as a pious act, but as a balm for wounded hearts, seeking solace in the gods who might understand their plight more than any human. Others turned to art, commissioning sculptures or mosaics that, beneath the facade of traditional scenes, encoded symbols of their inner turmoil: fraying ropes, wilting flowers, closed gates. These subtle acts of self-preservation mattered deeply. Though never enough to fully heal the trauma, they allowed a flicker of identity to endure beyond the roles imposed upon them. Only occasionally would a historian centuries later stumble upon a half-burnt letter, or an oblique reference in a philosophical treatise, hinting at a world of pain and perseverance hidden beneath imperial splendor. As you drift nearer to sleep, let your mind soften with the knowledge that these women's stories transcend the spectacles of power and triumph. Beneath the laurel crowns and the shimmering silk, they bore burdens that no triumph could erase. Their post-marriage years were not comfortable retirements, but relentless battles against fear that had become woven into the very fabric of their being. In this realm of silent suffering and covert resilience, we find a tender reminder that the human spirit, even under the dull weight of enforced roles, can still kindle sparks of resistance. Though lost to the official records, their whispered defiance lingers in the quiet corners of history, urging us to remember that beneath the triumphs of empires lies the fragile tapestry of individual lives, each thread a testament to both the depth of cruelty and the enduring power of hope. Legacy of Roman marriage rituals, modern reflections on historical injustice. Allow your thoughts to drift drowsily as we bridge the chasm between ancient Rome and our present world. Though the Roman marriage ceremonies have long since faded into history, their dark echoes still reverberate in cultures across medieval Europe, parts of Asia, and regions of Africa where forced unions, domestic violence, and gender discrimination endure. These are not mere relics of a distant past. They are living injustices, continually reshaped by local traditions and entrenched power dynamics. In many corners of the globe, Young women are still wed against their will, deemed possessions rather than persons. Spousal abuse remains common, excused by faulty interpretations of custom or scripture that grant men unchecked authority over their wives' bodies. And in every culture where consent is dismissed and autonomy is constrained, the ghost of Roman law's allowance for marital subjugation lingers, reminding us that when legal systems legitimize coercion, women become systemic victims. Studying ancient Rome illuminates these hidden mechanisms of power. When Roman statutes treated abuse and rape as reasonable, if framed as household discipline, they codified the subordination of women into the very fabric of society. The lessons for today are stark. Even when modern civil rights legislation exists, enforcement gaps and lingering biases, such as the assumption that women should obey, undermine true equality. Domestic violence remains a global scourge, often perpetuated by legal loopholes or societal taboos that silence survivors. Retelling the Roman truth is a vital wake-up call. We must guard against complacency. Human rights awareness needs perpetual nurturing. Victims of violence require not only emergency refuge, but long-term emotional and legal support. Policymakers must scrutinize marriage, reproductive, and personal protection laws to ensure they do not harbor vestiges of coercive control. History's value here lies in showing that unchallenged endurance can calcify into cultural norm. When women are compelled into silence, entire communities suffocate under the weight of injustice. Translating historical insight into real-world action means building robust support networks, shelters, counseling services, and helplines that operate beyond sporadic funding or goodwill. We must cultivate safe spaces, both physical and online, where women can share their stories without fear of reprisal. Gender equality education should start early in schools, teaching respect, consent, and the unacceptability of violence. Meanwhile, law enforcement, healthcare professionals, and journalists require specialized training to identify, respond to, and prevent abuse, with protocols that center survivors' voices rather than institutional inertia. Ancient Rome thus offers a grim mirror. It shows how easily legal sanction of violence can become normalized. If we cease our collective vigilance, that cycle may repeat tomorrow under different names, in unfamiliar settings, yet propelled by the same mechanisms of power and silence. Let us heed this lesson and continue to confront every shadow of forced marriage, every vestige of legal violence, and every culture that insists a woman's body and voice are not her own. In closing, imagine the dusty scrolls of Roman law unfurling once more, not in a museum, but in the courtroom, the clinic, the classroom, and the living room. May their faded ink remind us that the struggle for autonomy and dignity is timeless, and that the legacy of ancient injustice lives on until we choose to end it. As your mind drifts towards sleep, carry this knowledge gently. Our duty is not only to remember, but to act. For if the lessons of Rome teach us anything, it is that complacency invites repetition, and only relentless commitment to justice can break the cycle. And now, as our journey through the shadows of ancient Rome draws to a close, let us allow the rhythm of our thoughts to slow and our breath to deepen, carrying us gently away from the echoes of marble corridors and the weight of unspoken sorrows. Imagine yourself reclining in a quiet chamber, the flicker of torchlight softening into a warm glow that seems to dissolve the very edges of the room, until only a comfortable haze remains a comforting cocoon of peace and safety. In these final moments, let the story's message settle within you like a gentle sigh, that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit carries within it both the capacity for suffering and the spark of resilience. Though our Roman brides endured unimaginable cruelty, their quiet acts of defiance, recording hidden journals, sharing coded warnings, seeking fleeting comfort in secret alliances, remind us that hope survives in the smallest of gestures. It lives in every whispered confession, every stolen moment of solidarity, every heartbeat that says, "I will endure." This story, at its core, speaks to the enduring power of empathy and the necessity of bearing witness. When the structures of law and custom conspire to silence the vulnerable, we must remember to listen, to speak up, and to hold space for voices that have long been stifled. Our shared humanity asks us to extend compassion beyond the bounds of time and place, learning from past injustices so that we may forge a gentler world in their wake. As the images of palace walls, veils of flammium, and trembling brides begin to dissolve into the soft glow of memory, allow yourself to drift further from their weight, focusing instead on the steady rise and fall of your chest, the gentle cadence of your own breath. Picture that final veil lifting, not in fear, but in relief, revealing a horizon suffused with dawn's first light, where justice, respect, and kindness hold sway. And so, dear friend, as you carry these reflections with you into the stillness of night, know that you are held in the gentle arms of history's lessons and of our shared commitment to shine a light on cruelty so it can never hide again. May this tale inspire you to honor every individual's right to autonomy, to stand with those who are silenced, and to cultivate spaces where every voice may be heard. Now, let the last vestiges of tension melt away, like ripples on a calm lake, leaving only the tranquil surface of your mind, clear and undisturbed. Thank you for joining us on this voyage into the hidden corridors of the past. If this whispered exploration has moved you, we invite you to subscribe to our channel so that together we can continue uncovering stories that both illuminate and uplift. Sleep well, and may your dreams be filled with warmth, understanding, and the soft promise of a kinder tomorrow. Good night.